energy breakfast drink with rich, natural flavor.
Not the kind of bathroom tissue that makes your nose prickle so you can't help. Achoo!
I think we need help. Fast.
In the 1970s, poverty didn't always shout. It showed up in the quiet details everyone could see but no one dared to mention. What invisible signs turned everyday life into a silent struggle you couldn't hide? Powdered milk in a plastic pitcher was the great equalizer of breakfast disappointment. You'd stumble into the kitchen, grab a bowl, and pour what looked like milk but tasted like something that had given up halfway through the job. It had this weird aftertaste, like wet chalk had been blended with a whisper of dairy. Still, it filled a bowl. That rehydrated powder got stirred with a big plastic spoon until the clumps mostly disappeared. If you were lucky, it had been chilling overnight. If not, you got room temp sadness poured over your store-brand flakes. Nobody actually liked it. Kids gagged, dads grimaced, and moms insisted it tastes just the same. But cartons of fresh milk were a luxury, and powdered milk was cheap, shelf-stable, and always waiting in the pantry beside a giant bag of dry beans. It was survival disguised as breakfast, and if you drank it without complaining, that meant you were trained, seasoned, a budget warrior in footy pajamas. Still, if the milk was disappointing, your jeans were even worse. Wearing Toughskins jeans from Sears wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a sentence. Made from a denim polyester blend that could stop a lawnmower blade, these pants were stiff, scratchy, and seemingly immune to age or movement. They came in weird colors, had reinforced knees, and could stand up by themselves after a day outside. Parents loved them because they were durable. Kids hated them because they made you walk like a robot. The worst part? They never died? You'd outgrow them before they wore out, only to see them passed down to your younger sibling, still holding shape, still stiff as cardboard. If you were lucky, they were blue. If not, you were rocking rust orange or mustard yellow and trying not to get roasted at recess. Even after countless washes, they stayed thick as armor and twice as unforgiving. But they were affordable. And if you ripped them climbing a fence, there was always an iron-on patch waiting in the junk drawer. Wearing Toughskins meant you knew the sound of your thighs rubbing together like sandpaper. But if your jeans didn't betray your status, your television setup definitely did. A metal television antenna with pliers as the remote was peak 70s innovation, because when the knob broke, and it always broke, no one ran to the store. You just grabbed whatever tool was nearby and made it work. Those bulky televisions were furniture, literal wood-paneled tanks. Changing the channel involved standing up, twisting a dial that clicked through 3 fuzzy stations, and praying the vertical hold didn't freak out. When the knob snapped off, you didn't replace it. You jammed in a pair of pliers, vice grips, or even a fork. Sometimes it was taped up with masking tape or rubber bands for extra grip, like some post-apocalyptic control lever. Getting the channel just right took surgeon-level precision and patience. You'd lean in, turn slowly, hear that satisfying clunk-clunk, and hope it landed on the right UHF miracle. If someone walked too close to the antenna, the screen would go berserk, so you'd angle it just right and bark, "No one move!" Until The Price is Right came in clear enough to see Bob Barker's microphone. Some households had elaborate antenna balancing rituals. One leg up, arm outstretched, holding a metal spoon while standing near the window. Others just wrapped the whole thing in aluminum foil and hoped for the best. Television time wasn't about ease. It was about negotiation, shared suffering, and creative problem solving. And speaking of creative, dinner time had its own government-issued solution. Government cheese in a cardboard box was the kind of food you didn't ask questions about. You just knew it showed up, sliced thick, and lasted forever. It came in a plain brown box, no branding, no nutrition label, just cheese. Well, sort of. It was dense, bright orange, and had a melting point somewhere just short of lava. You couldn't cut it with a regular knife. You needed a cleaver or an axe. If you managed to get a clean slice without bending your kitchen utensils, you were basically a culinary lumberjack. It was too rubbery cold, too nuclear hot when melted, and somehow still the MVP of 1,000 meals. But once it got shredded or melted, eventually, it showed up in everything. Casseroles, grilled sandwiches, macaroni that was mostly elbow, and very little cheese. It coated broccoli like glue. It welded 2 slices of bread together like a bricklayer's dream. It was a badge of thrift and a staple of survival. Kids brought it in sandwiches that weighed more than their textbooks. Moms hoarded it like gold bars in the freezer. And no matter how processed it was, it held communities together, one heavy slice at a time. You either loved it or tolerated it. But everyone respected it. That cheese made stretch meals possible and gave every dish a glow like a construction vest. Still, no amount of cheese could disguise the smell of what hit the frying pan every Thursday. Liver and onions wasn't a meal, it was a warning. The smell hit you before your mom even called you to the table. You'd walk into the kitchen and be greeted by the heavy scent of sizzling regret. The liver, tough as a tire and cooked until gray, sat under a pile of translucent onions meant to soften the flavor. It didn't. You were expected to eat every bite because it was good for you. Translation: cheap protein that kept the grocery bill down. Some parents even called it a treat, as if anyone ever asked for second helpings. No ketchup could mask it. No bread could bury it. You just chewed and tried not to breathe through your nose. It was bitter, mushy, and stuck with you, literally and emotionally. Some kids tried hiding it in napkins. Others fed it to the dog under the table, only to realize even the dog had standards. Leftovers went into sandwiches. Sometimes it reappeared the next night, reheated and even tougher. You'd chew for what felt like hours while staring at the clock, counting down the minutes until dessert, if there was any. Still, you ate it. Not because you liked it, but because that was dinner. The kind of dinner that made you appreciate peanut butter more than most people ever will. And if the meal was grim, at least the cooking fat had a story of its own. A coffee can full of bacon grease was the unofficial flavor station of every poor kid's kitchen. You'd see it sitting proudly next to the stove, no lid, no label, just a dented old can full of meat drippings and ambition. Every time bacon hit the skillet, Mom would pour off the fat and stash it for later. Why waste a perfectly good ingredient when it could fry tomorrow's eggs, crisp up potatoes, or even flavor the pancakes? That can held the essence of 100 breakfasts. It was thick at the bottom, layered with sediment like geological bacon history. Sometimes it congealed into a creamy mess. Sometimes it smoked like a chimney when reused for the 3rd time that week. But it worked. It added taste, it added calories, and it saved buying oil. It was both seasoning and survival. And if the grease had a few bacon bits floating around, even better. You dipped bread in it. You reused it until it practically developed a personality. Bacon grease didn't just cook, it connected generations. But if bacon grease was gold, the cereal situation was less shiny. No-name brand cereal in a baggie was breakfast for those of us living on the edge of the food pyramid. You didn't find it in the cereal aisle's middle section. You crouched down, way down to the bottom shelf and grabbed that crinkly plastic sack filled with sad, dusty flakes or weird puffed things that kinda looked like Fruit Loops but tasted like cardboard hope. No mascot. No prize inside. Just a white label that said Toasted O's or Sweetened Corn Crunch, like it was trying to convince itself it was worth eating. You poured it into your bowl. It made a sound like packing peanuts, and then you hit it with that pitcher of powdered milk and watched it all turn soggy in under 30 seconds. No snap, no crackle, barely a pop. But it was cheap, real cheap. Mom could buy a sack the size of a small dog for less than half the price of the name brand. And if you complained, you were told to sprinkle a little sugar on top and be grateful. That cereal may not have been fun, but it filled you up. And speaking of things that didn't fit quite right, your next outfit probably had a long family history. Hand-me-downs from cousins you didn't even like were a rite of passage, wrapped in a garbage bag and smelling faintly like someone else's attic. You never asked for them. You never wanted them. But every few months your mom would show up with a stack of perfectly good clothes that had survived multiple siblings and were now headed straight for your closet. The shirts had pilling. The jeans had weird stains. The shoes were 2 sizes off, but still got shoved onto your feet with the lie, "They'll stretch." Sometimes they were cool. Most times, not even close. Your new winter coat had 3 previous owners and a name written inside the collar that wasn't yours. You didn't get to complain. You were told to smile and say thank you when your aunt handed them over with pride. Kids at school might notice. You learned to deflect, to joke, or just to keep your head down. But deep inside, you dreamed of clothes with actual tags and no suspicious armpit wear. And just when you wanted to disappear into the couch had plans of its own. Plastic covers on the living room couch weren't just about protecting furniture, they were a full-body punishment. That shiny, crinkly shell turned every TV night into a sweaty endurance test. You'd sit down and immediately hear it. Squeak, shift, squeak. In summer? Forget it. Your thighs stuck to that thing like melted fruit snacks. In winter? It was cold, slippery, and loud enough to wake the dog. And yet, no one questioned it. Plastic covers meant that couch would stay pristine forever, untouched by juice spills, cookie crumbs, or stray crayons. Unless company came over, that couch was off limits. Or worse, only available if you didn't squirm too much. You'd perch on the edge like it was sacred ground, afraid to wrinkle the vinyl or shift your weight. Even the dog got banished to the floor. The whole room was nice in theory, but functioned like a museum exhibit for a life you didn't quite live. It looked fancy, smelled faintly of Lysol, and felt like a plastic slip and slide with no fun at the end. Your back hurt, your legs sweated, and you had permanent plastic imprints on your calves. But hey, it kept the furniture looking good, right? Unfortunately, your dessert didn't always follow the same logic. The ice cream was just ice milk, and that difference hit hard after the first spoonful. It looked like the real thing. It sat in the freezer next to the real thing. But the second you tasted it, you knew. This was a frozen letdown. Ice milk was thinner, sadder, and melted into a puddle before you could even finish your bowl. It had the texture of cold foam and the flavor of diluted disappointment. You'd dig in, hoping for creamy indulgence, and instead get something that tasted like sweetened air. It lacked richness, it lacked joy, and yet it was what you had. You weren't about to complain out loud. Ice milk was treat enough, especially when it was scooped into old mugs or reused butter tubs. Some families added a splash of chocolate syrup to mask the flavor, others stirred it into a milkshake just to make it tolerable. You weren't allowed to waste it either. You ate it, smiled politely, and maybe sprinkled crushed crackers or sad sprinkles on top to make it festive. No fudge, no cherries, just a frozen lie. Still, it was dessert. And you learned to appreciate it, or at least pretend to. Because the only thing worse than no dessert was no ketchup. And the next fix required some serious commitment. Mixing ketchup and water to make more ketchup was a culinary act of desperation wrapped in red regret. You'd grab the nearly empty bottle, twist off the crusty cap, add a splash of water, and shake it like you were mixing a cocktail of sadness. The result? A watery, slightly pink drizzle that tasted like watered-down childhood. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't tasty. But it was enough to give your fries a little life or coat that mystery meat sandwich. Sometimes you double down and add a dash of salt or pepper to bring it back to life, but it mostly ended up on the plate like a soupy puddle. Your parents called it stretching the bottle. You called it, why does this taste like tomato soup? But complaining didn't get you anything except a lecture about waste and money not growing on trees. Every bottle got used to the last drop, even if you had to flip it upside down and prop it in a corner for 3 days. And honestly, when food was scarce, every drop counted. That thin ketchup made it just one more day till payday. It was frugal science in action, whether you liked it or not. And if dinner was always one squeeze away from a science experiment, the house wasn't much more luxurious, especially once the cold set in. The thermostat in a 70s house wasn't just a dial, it was a line in the sand. Parents treated it like a sacred relic, never to be touched without permission or a written declaration of frostbite. You'd be freezing, fingers like popsicles, and Mom would say, "Put on a sweater." Then a second sweater, then a blanket, then maybe sit under the dog. Turning on the heat was seen as weak, wasteful, or wildly indulgent. Some families taped a note over the thermostat. Do not touch unless you're paying the bill. That thing could be in the dead center of the wall, glowing orange with temptation, and no one dared twist it. Space heaters? Risky. They blew fuses or caught socks on fire. Electric blankets? A luxury item only Grandpa had, and he kept it locked in the closet. You'd go to bed in socks, sweats, and a hoodie, buried under 5 layers like you were camping in the Arctic. Quilts were piled on like sandbags, and your breath made little clouds in the morning. But no one ever turned the heat up, not unless company was coming over or someone got the flu. Even then, it was only for an hour. And while your toes might have been numb, your shoes weren't much better, especially when they had their own built-in air conditioning. Holes in your shoes didn't mean new shoes. They meant cardboard. You'd pull apart a cereal box, cut out the shape of your sole, and slide it into your sneaker like some kind of soggy orthopedic miracle. Sometimes it was a Pop-Tarts box, sometimes Raisin Bran. It was soft at first, warm even. But the second you stepped into a puddle, game over. That cardboard turned into oatmeal and your socks paid the price. Still, you didn't complain. You just dried them by the radiator and kept going. You'd tape it, replace it, and keep wearing those shoes until they practically walked off your feet on their own. The soles flapped like flip-flops. The toes curled up like elf shoes. New shoes were for Christmas or growing a full size, not for silly little things like comfort. You learned to walk light. You avoided rain. You stopped running in gym class because you didn't want to leave half your shoe behind. And still, you kept wearing them. Because that's what you had. That cardboard bought you time and pride. Meanwhile, over at the window, your curtains weren't exactly Martha Stewart approved. Bath towels used as curtains weren't a style choice. They were survival. You needed privacy, warmth, and something to block out the sun? Grab a towel. Not a fresh one either, usually one with frayed edges and bleach stains. You'd clip it up with clothespins, thumbtacks, safety pins, or whatever was handy. Sometimes you'd even wrap rubber bands around coat hangers to rig a curtain rod. Sometimes they matched. Most times they didn't. Maybe a beach towel on one window, a faded hotel towel on the other, and an old sheet layered in for extra insulation. They fluttered in the breeze, they sagged in the middle, and they smelled faintly like mildew, but they did the job. In the summer, they blocked heat. In the winter, they trapped it. Real curtains were expensive. These were free. You'd tell visitors you were in the middle of redecorating. But when someone came over, you just pretended it was temporary, even though it had been like that for 3 years. And if the towels came down, it wasn't to wash them. It was to be repurposed as blankets. But if your windows were questionable, your dinner definitely followed suit, usually straight from a can. Dinner was whatever came out of a can, and some nights felt like a roulette wheel of aluminum survival. Spin the pantry shelf and land on creamed corn, canned ravioli, maybe some mystery meat labeled beef product in gravy. You didn't complain. You grabbed the can opener, dumped it into a pot, and called it a meal. Vienna sausages? Delicacy? SpaghettiOs? Main course. Canned green beans boiled to mush? A vegetable side, technically. And if you were really lucky, there'd be a can of fruit cocktail for dessert, half syrup, 2 grapes, and 1 suspicious cherry. These meals were quick, cheap, and shelf-stable. They didn't taste great, but they were filling. Kind of. Most nights you'd just douse everything in that watery ketchup and call it a win. And if you ran out of everything, you found another harshest R can. Because when money was tight, you ate what you had. But even after dinner, the reminder of frugal living was waiting in the bathroom. Scratchy, see-through, and utterly unavoidable. Toilet paper was 1-ply, thin as tracing paper and rougher than a cat's tongue. You didn't squeeze the Charmin because there was no Charmin. What you got was the store brand in a plastic-wrapped 12-pack that looked soft but felt like it had been sanded. You used twice as much to do half the job, carefully folded for maximum efficiency and minimal risk. If it tore mid-use, you didn't scream, you just sighed. Sometimes it was gray, sometimes off-white, And every so often you found a rogue wood chip in the sheet like nature's cruel joke. Fancy two-ply was for rich folks, or the neighbors you envied every time you went over and noticed the plush roll on their wall. And heaven help you if you were sick and had to blow your nose. That stuff could start a brush fire if you rubbed too hard. Still, you made do. Nobody thought it was weird. Nobody knew better. It was just part of the budget, and a very itchy part at that. But at least in the bathroom, you weren't trying to preserve something that was literally made to be ripped apart, like wrapping paper. You saved the wrapping paper. Every birthday, Christmas, or baby shower came with an unspoken rule. Open carefully. No wild tearing, no ripping down the middle, just slow peeling at the tape and strategic folding like you were handling ancient scrolls. Moms would hover with a watchful eye and swoop in the moment you had the paper halfway off, flattening it onto her lap like she was pressing fresh laundry. Some pieces had names already written on the inside flap from last year. That didn't matter. Flip it over, fold it up, stash it in the kitchen drawer next to the scissors, masking tape, and twist ties. When Christmas rolled around again, the same crinkled snowmen and faded Santas made their encore. Some people ironed it, others stacked it in boxes marked nice ones and everyday birthdays. It wasn't just paper, it was policy. You grew up thinking this was normal until you visited a friend's house and watched them shred through a gift like it was nothing. It felt criminal. But paper was money, and so was space. Which is why sometimes two kids shared one twin-sized bed and everyone just made it work. Two kids in one twin bed was not a punishment. It was standard practice. The mattress sagged in the middle, the blanket never covered both people at once, and the sheet always came untucked by midnight. You'd start out politely, one kid on each side. By morning, it was a tangle of elbows, knees, and dreams interrupted by someone snoring. If you were lucky, you were the bigger sibling and claimed the wall side. If you were the youngest, you got the foot warmer job, curled sideways across the bottom like a human space heater. The springs creaked like an old barn door. The pillow smelled like every head that ever used it, and the mattress was more duct tape than fabric. But it was a bed, and you didn't question it. You whispered secrets under the covers, argued over the blanket, and negotiated elbow room like diplomats. Nobody had a canopy bed or memory foam mattress. Just a squeaky twin, shared love, and nightly negotiations. And if you wanted privacy, you faked sleep. But the real test of patience and strategy came when you tried making a call on a phone that looked like it had been through war. A rotary phone with a frayed cord was the communication lifeline of the 70s, and a masterclass in patience. It was heavy, usually beige or avocado green, and sat on a table that doubled as the family filing cabinet. The cord had been twisted so many times it looked like a slinky in mid-tantrum. Exposed wires peeked through, and if you held the receiver wrong, you got a buzz, or worse, silence. Dialing took effort. You stuck your finger in the metal ring, spun it around, let it click back, and then started all over again. God help you if the number had too many nines or zeros. It was a full upper body workout. And don't even think about messing up halfway through. That meant starting over. Again. If the cord disconnected mid-call, you'd pinch the wires together with one hand while trying to scream your message before the line cut out. We didn't know luxury. We knew tension, static, and the thrill of hearing a dial tone. But at least when the call was over, you could flop down and unwrap a gourmet sandwich, 2 slices of bread, and, well, whatever was cheapest. Bologna sandwiches were the unofficial meal of every broke kid in the 70s. No lettuce, no fancy cheese, just a floppy circle of pink meat slapped between 2 slices of Wonder Bread. If you were lucky, there was a squiggle of mustard or mayo. If not, dry as a desert and twice as chewy. Sometimes it was fried, sometimes cold, sometimes so thin it looked like meat paper. It came in the giant pack with 30 slices for $3 and had that distinct smell that lingered in lunchboxes until June. The edges would curl, the bread would get soggy, but nobody complained because it was food, and food was not wasted. You might trade it at lunch, but mostly you just ate it, stared at the wall, and dreamed of peanut butter. Bologna was the great equalizer. It didn't matter if your family had 5 kids or 1, that sandwich was always there. Reliable, boring, affordable, and the only thing worse than a dry bologna sandwich was realizing you were out of clean clothes and your mom said the dryer was too expensive to run today. No dryer? No problem. Laundry day in the 1970s meant a backyard full of flapping towels, stiff socks, and frozen jeans. If it was summer, the sun did its job. If it was winter, you hoped the wind didn't carry your underpants into the neighbor's yard. Clotheslines crisscrossed the backyard like spider webs, and every clothespin felt like a little soldier keeping your dignity from blowing away. Hanging clothes was a 2-person job, one to hand over the damp laundry and one to pin it while standing ankle-deep in muddy grass. The air smelled like soap and cold metal. And if the wind picked up, you could forget about matching socks ever again. Sometimes the clothes froze before they dried, turning your jeans into denim sculptures. Still, there was pride in line-dried sheets. They crackled when you crawled into bed and made you feel like you'd slept outside, whether you wanted to or not. Dryer? That was luxury. A working spin cycle and some wind was the real-world combo dryer of the frugal family. And once those stiff towels came down and were folded into a reused bread bag, it was time to pack for school, which meant grabbing your makeshift book bag and praying it held together. Your backpack wasn't a backpack. It was a paper grocery bag with 2 cutout handles and a dream. You carried your books, your lunch, your gym shoes, and your self-worth in a brown sack that started disintegrating the second it rained. There were no zippers, no compartments, no name brand stitched into the side, just your name, handwritten in marker across the top, hopefully in permanent ink. Kids reinforced them with duct tape or stapled the sides when they tore. Some even double-bagged like it was an art project in structural engineering. If your books were too heavy, the bag's bottom would give out mid-hallway, scattering homework like confetti. And if you dared put anything cold, like a juice box or leftover casserole, goodbye paper integrity. Teachers knew the struggle and let it slide when kids showed up with mashed papers and soggy spelling tests. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. Barely. And if you were lucky enough to get everything home without the handles ripping, you knew you were living the dream. But no matter how ragged your bag looked, the real highlight of the day came when you sat cross-legged in front of the television and peeled back the foil on a steaming tray of nostalgia. Television dinners were not just food. They were theater. When one showed up on your dinner plate, you knew something special was happening. Maybe your parents were going out. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe it was just Friday. But when you heard that crinkle of foil and saw the segmented tray slide onto your television tray table, you knew you'd hit the jackpot. Salisbury steak, watery mashed potatoes, limp green beans, and that one magical brownie square that always cooked too hard around the edges and too soft in the middle. You ate every bite with reverence while The Brady Bunch played in the background and your legs dangled off the shag-carpeted couch. The smell of aluminum and artificial gravy filled the room like a beacon of midweek joy. You didn't care that the corn tasted like metal or that the peas had fused into a green blob. This was high living. This was luxury. This was your 5-star meal in a tin. And the tray? Sometimes reused, sometimes thrown away, but always remembered. It was dinner without dishes, calories without questions, and warmth without work. And if you were lucky, no one asked you to share your brownie. But once you cleaned your tray and threw away the evidence, it was time to climb into the family car, which probably came with more ventilation than you bargained for. A hole in the floorboard of the family car wasn't just a feature, it was a weather report. You could see the road rushing by underneath your feet, tiny pebbles flying by in a blur while the wind whistled through the rusted-out corner near the gas pedal. Rain turned the back seat into a splash zone. Cold weather meant wrapping a blanket around your ankles and hoping you didn't lose a toe to frostbite. And if someone dropped a toy, well, goodbye. That Matchbox car is part of the freeway now. There were no seatbelts, just vinyl seats that squeaked and stuck to your thighs, a metal dash that could knock out a tooth, and windows that needed both hands to crank. But the hole was legendary. It wasn't a defect. It was a rite of passage. Every pothole gave you a fresh gust of wind and a thrilling glimpse of the road below. Parents threw down a rubber mat and called it fixed. And the car still ran, so what's the problem? You didn't need luxury, you needed a ride. And if that ride also came with a side of exhaust and engine smoke, well, that's what rolling the window down was for. Speaking of fumes, the next scent you inhaled might have been a vitamin-rich substitute. Or at least, that's what the box promised. Tang was not orange juice, but in the 1970s, it was close enough. The bright orange powder lived in a big tub with a cracked plastic lid and a scooper that was never where you left it. You'd dump a heap into a pitcher of tap water, stir it with a long spoon until it foamed, and pretend you were a NASA astronaut powering up for liftoff. It didn't taste like oranges. It didn't taste like anything grown on Earth. But it had sugar, and it was cold, and sometimes that's all you needed. Tang coated your tongue, stained your upper lip, and left a weird chalky film on your teeth that you somehow liked. It was fruity, fizzy, and fake, and proud of it. Moms loved it because it had vitamins, and kids loved it because it was better than milk. Sort of. You drank it with breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner, especially if the real juice had run out days ago. Tang was everywhere. It filled thermoses, flavored popsicles, and made every kid feel like they were part of the space race, even if they'd never seen a launch pad. And while it didn't hydrate like water or refresh like real juice, it was affordable, plentiful, and bold, much like life itself in the 1970s. Before Fandango or streaming apps told us what was playing, there was the operator, and calling the theater was an event in itself. You would dial a number, usually a long one, and wait as a robotic voice or sometimes an actual person listed off every movie and showtime like it was the State of the Union. Showtimes for the weekend of July 24th, Gremlins at 7:30, The Goonies at 9:15, Ghostbusters at 10:45. You could not skip ahead. You had to listen. Carefully. And maybe even write it down if you were planning a big night. If someone in the house picked up the phone while you were listening, forget it. You had to start over. And if you called during a busy hour, good luck hearing anything over the static and background noise. But it was still exciting. The build-up, the anticipation. You felt like you were about to join something important, something bigger than yourself. Because back then, watching a movie meant going somewhere. It meant tickets, seats, sticky floors, and that one kid who always threw popcorn. It meant magic. But if you wanted movie magic at home, you did not need a theater. You just needed to clear your schedule, grab the good blanket, and stake your claim on the couch. Going to the gas station used to be fun. I am not even kidding. In the 1970s, pulling into a station was not just about filling up the tank, it was about what you got for free. Gas station giveaways were the absolute jackpot of roadside errands. You would get real glassware, like full-on drinking glasses with cartoon characters or sports team logos printed on them. There were dishes, figurines, tiny toys, even aluminum tumblers in wild colors. Some stations had full sets you could collect over time, which meant every gas stop felt like you were unlocking a new piece in the puzzle. Parents would even choose where to fill up based on who had the best freebies that week. And kids? We kept track. We knew which stations had the cool tumblers and which ones were slacking. Sometimes they even gave out trading stamps to go along with your haul, so it was a 2-for-1 deal. You might not remember the cost of gas back then, but you definitely remember that little thrill when the attendant handed over your freebie through the car window. It was like a tiny prize for just living life. But if you think that was exciting, wait until you hear about the one thing that made kids count down the days from summer to winter, flipping through pages and circling dreams. It was the sound that echoed through every classroom hallway. Reap! The sound of a trapper keeper flap being opened in one violent motion like a magician revealing a trick. These were not just school supplies. These were badges of identity. Whether yours had a geometric neon triangle design or a Lisa Frank dolphin flying through outer space, it said everything about who you were, or at least who you wanted to be. It had pockets that barely held together, paper that never stayed in its rings, and plastic covers that warped in the sun. And it was perfect. Everyone had their method. Some kids had the calendar planner filled out like a Wall Street broker. Others used the plastic sleeve to hide secret notes, torn comic strips, or detention slips they forgot to give their parents. But more than anything, it was yours. You picked it out. You zipped it closed. You carried it like a suitcase filled with dreams. And then one day, they were banned. Teachers called them distractions. Schools claimed they were too noisy. And just like that, they vanished. But if you ever hear that unmistakable rip in your memory, you will know. That was not just plastic. That was personality. And what filled it was just as strange, just as vivid, and just as forgotten. Like the time your notebook smelled like pepperoni, root beer, or worse. Three-wheeled tririccars were one of the stranger automotive experiments to come out of the 1970s, and somehow they were totally legal to drive on regular roads. Companies like Dale and Myers tried to pitch these oddball vehicles as the future of safe, affordable transportation. But here's the twist. They were wildly unstable. They looked like space pods, handled like shopping carts, and tipped over if you so much as looked at a corner the wrong way. Some of them were so light, 2 people could lift one side off the ground. Still, they were street legal. There were no strict safety standards for this sort of thing, and as long as it had a license plate and functioning lights, it could hit the road. The idea was to offer fuel efficiency and savings during the oil crisis, but in practice, they were more likely to cause whiplash than save gas. That did not stop eager drivers from picking them up and zooming around town like extras from a science fiction movie. Today, these vehicles have either vanished completely or landed in museums as cautionary tales. But if that sounds bizarre, just wait until we tell you about kids riding gas-powered mini-bikes down neighborhood sidewalks like it was no big deal. Owning a Trapper Keeper in the 1980s felt like owning a briefcase made just for kids, but with neon colors, Velcro, and personality. These were not just folders. These were statements. You did not just store your homework in a Trapper Keeper. You stored your identity. From bold geometric designs to wild illustrations of race cars, dolphins, or laser grids that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie, the outside of your Trapper Keeper said something about you. And that satisfying rip of the Velcro? That was music. It had pockets for pencils, slots for notes, compartments you never used but felt cooler just knowing they were there. There was something so absurdly organized about them that it made you want to turn your life into a schedule. You would write the dates on your notebook dividers, color code your subjects, and then forget all of it by Wednesday. But hey, the effort was there. You felt important carrying one around. It made you feel like you were growing up, and even if you never opened it for anything other than doodling weird cartoons during math class, it still felt like a win. But when it came to keeping track of things, there was one object that really made you feel like a collector, and not just of stuff, but of memories. Before recycling was trendy, it was profitable, at least if you were a kid in the 1970s with ambition and a wagon. You could walk up and down the block knocking on doors, asking neighbors if they had any bottles to spare. Not water bottles. We are talking glass soda and milk bottles, sturdy, heavy, and returnable. Stores gave you money for them. Not a lot, but enough. A nickel here, a dime there. If you collected enough, you could walk away with a whole dollar. And in 1970s kid currency, that was like a small fortune. You could buy a comic book, a candy bar, a slushie, or save up for something even bigger. You felt responsible, independent, even a little proud. Sure, your hands smelled like old soda, and the glass sometimes had gunk in it, but that did not matter. You were earning. This was how kids learned hustle. Before allowances and debit cards, you had to get creative, and when the work was done, you went home, sat cross-legged on the shag carpet, and turned on the television to that one channel you could never quite explain. You did not earn scratch and sniff stickers. You survived for them. They were tiny, circular, and usually smelled like something familiar, but just a little off. Root beer that smelled too sweet. Pizza that somehow had a hint of crayon. And then, of course, the mysterious ones labeled yuck or gross that every kid lined up to sniff, gag, and laugh at. Teachers kept them in secret drawers like treasures. You never saw them hand one out casually. No, These were rewards for a perfect spelling test, a cleaned desk, or just being quiet when the class got loud. You would stick them onto your folder or your pencil case and guard them like gold. Some kids had entire sticker books dedicated to collecting and trading them. And yes, there were rules. No scratching too hard. No peeling it off someone else's desk. No faking a smell just to fit in. It sounds silly now, but back then, it was currency. A root beer sticker meant you were doing something right. A mystery stink meant you had status. They faded over time. The smells wore off. The adhesive dried up. But even now, if someone mentions scratch and sniff, you know exactly what they are talking about. And that memory is still sharp. Like the clang of something else you carried proudly in your hands, covered in cartoon heroes heavy as a brick and always leaking tomato soup. The Peachy folder was like a social billboard. Everyone had one. Those tan or yellow folders with athletes printed in faded ink on the front. Football players mid-tackle, baseball players mid-swing. They were meant to be neutral, practical, but they never stayed that way. Because the moment that folder landed on your desk, it became a war zone of doodles, lightning bolts, band logos, stencils, flames, hearts with names inside them, graffiti letters that took 15 tries to get right. Every inch of it became your personal art gallery or battlefield. These things aged like ancient relics by the time June came around. It did not matter how boring the class was. Your Peachy folder made sure you had something to focus on, something to claim. And if a substitute teacher tried to take it away, that was a declaration of war. Of course, personal style extended beyond the page, because it was not just about what you carried. It was about what you wore. And in the 1980s, you had better know how to roll your jeans or risk social exile. Phones in the 1970s were not private, not even close. They had cords, long spiral ones that stretched down hallways, wrapped around doors, and somehow always ended up tangled. Every house had one line, maybe two if you were fancy. That meant when the phone rang, it was anyone's guess who would answer and who would listen. If you were a kid trying to call a friend, you had to pass through a gauntlet of parents and siblings just to get 5 minutes of conversation. And if you were a teenager, good luck. Eavesdropping was practically a sport. Someone would quietly pick up another receiver and breathe like a horror movie villain. You would hear that subtle click and knew you were not alone. Get off the phone became a daily soundtrack, and heaven help you if someone else needed the line. I'm expecting a call meant you had to wrap it up, no matter what life-changing gossip you were in the middle of. There was no voicemail, no caller ID. If you missed a call, it was just gone. But if you wanted real independence as a kid, you had to earn it. And for many, that meant waking up while it was still dark, grabbing a heavy canvas bag and heading out into the cold. Saturday morning cartoons were not just shows. They were rituals. You would wake up at 6 or 7, bowl of cereal in hand, and stake out your spot in front of the television before anyone else in the house even stirred, pajamas still on, eyes still half shut. But you were ready. The networks fought hard for your attention. ABC, NBC, CBS, they all rolled out animated powerhouses like The Smurfs, He-Man, The Real Ghostbusters, Gem, G.I. Joe, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each show had its slot, and missing one felt like missing a holiday. But for every golden episode came the heartbreak of your favorite show being bumped, or worse, replaced. The dreaded special news report could interrupt your flow like a slap to the face. You would sit there in disbelief as your cartoon got pulled for a political debate or weather update. No warnings, no mercy. Still, the lineup gave you something to look forward to all week, and for those few hours, everything felt right in the world. Cartoons, cereal, and commercials that somehow got stuck in your head forever. Because let's be honest, there are still jingles from that era that we can sing from memory, word for word. Fashion in the 1980s did not whisper, it screamed. On your feet were jellies, those translucent plastic shoes that felt like walking on rubber bands and smelled like a new toy aisle. On your shirts, colors that changed with your body heat. Hypercolor magic that turned purple when you sweated in gym class or clashed wildly with everything else you were wearing. And on your sneakers, Velcro. Lots and lots of Velcro. Not because you could not tie laces, but because Velcro was cool. It snapped open. It snapped shut. It made noise when you moved. These were not just trends. They were signals. You were part of the world now. You were growing up. Even if your jellies gave you blisters, even if your shirt never changed back to blue, you wore it anyway because it made you feel like part of something big and bright and new. But somewhere in the closet of your memory, these styles got boxed up and left behind. They do not show up in vintage shops. They do not make sense on paper. But you remember them. You felt them. And sometimes, you wish you could wear them again, just to feel that wild, fearless energy. The kind you had when even dinner felt like a science experiment in metal trays with tiny compartments and a brownie that burned your tongue. Kit cars were the adult version of a Lego set, if Legos went 70 miles per hour and could possibly explode. You would order a fiberglass body from a catalog, bolt it onto a salvaged frame from a junkyard car, and presto, you had a custom ride. There were kits styled to look like sports cars, vintage racers, or even futuristic space cruisers. No two were ever quite the same, and that was the charm. What was missing? Crash testing, emissions control, reliable seatbelts, minor stuff. Laws eventually caught on and tightened up hard. Nowadays, building a kit car is like applying for a pilot's license with extra paperwork. But in the 1970s, it was a golden age for homegrown horsepower. Yet none of these Frankenstein rides held a candle to the tank-sized beast that was the used checker cab turned personal car. The Columbia House penny deal felt like a loophole in the universe. You sent in a little card, maybe glued a few stamps to it, and next thing you knew, your mailbox was blessed with 12 brand new cassette tapes, or compact discs if you were ahead of the curve. All for just 1 cent. 1 cent. It felt like a scam in your favor. No way this is real, you thought. But there it was. Whitney Houston, Prince, Bon Jovi, Huey Lewis, boom! Delivered to your doorstep like you were some kind of record label executive. Of course, the catch was that you had to buy more albums at full price later. Parents were suspicious. Some tried to stop you. Others fell into the trap themselves. It was like a rite of passage, a shared secret, a little music heist you got away with, until the bill came due, of course. Still, there was no denying the power of opening that box. Shrink-wrapped covers, that new plastic smell, your very own collection. But for real-time music discovery, you only needed one thing, 3 letters, 1 channel, and a whole lot of attitude. Pop beads were not jewelry. They were a sound, a game, and a statement. You snapped them together with a satisfying click, strung them around your neck, and pulled them apart just to do it all over again. Every kid had a handful of these plastic links, shiny, pastel-colored beads that turned any boring afternoon into a full-blown runway. They popped apart as easily as they connected, so they were never permanent. But that was the fun of it. You were constantly remaking them, reshaping them, changing who you were from hour to hour. And if you graduated from pop beads, you moved on to charm necklaces. Long chains covered in dangling trinkets, tiny telephones, shoes, hair dryers, or soda cans. They jingled when you walked, got tangled in your hair, and made you feel like the coolest kid in the cafeteria. They did not match your outfit. That was never the point. They were chaotic, personal, and loud. The kind of loud you were proud of. Today, jewelry is sleek and serious. But back then, it was fun. It was play. And it told a story with every piece. Kind of like the clunky pixels and beeping soundtrack of the very first video games, where a single joystick took you everywhere and nowhere. You had not lived until you beat the Oregon Trail without dying of dysentery. That was the holy grail of 1980s computer gaming. Those chunky gray computers in the school lab, that pixelated map, that relentless text box reminding you that little Timothy had broken a leg and your oxen just drowned crossing a river. Iconic. It was not just a game, it was survival. You learned real-life lessons in that pixel wilderness. Like how much meat you could carry back from a hunt, not much, or why you should never try to ford a river without thinking it through. And somehow, we were totally into it. The green and black graphics, the clunky keyboard, the fact that it felt like schoolwork but kind of fun. You would all huddle around one screen, a group of 5 kids making group decisions like mini pioneers, and somehow it felt like the fate of your wagon family actually mattered. It was your first taste of choices in gaming, your first little moral dilemmas. Do you trade clothing for bullets? Do you rest for 2 days? Or do you push on and risk everyone freezing to death? Still, once the school bell rang, it was game over. And if you wanted to know what was playing in theaters that weekend, you did not Google it. You picked up the phone. Hair in the 1980s was not about subtlety. It was about volume. The bigger, the better. Girls spent hours teasing their bangs to towering heights, spraying layer after layer of Aqua Net until it could deflect a light breeze or a brick. Boys rocked mullets, short in the front and long in the back, as if undecided between rebellion and respectability. And in every bathroom across America, there was the smell of chemicals, the click of banana clips, and the sound of someone blow-drying their future. These banana clips snapped open like jaws and clamped down on ponytails like traps, creating a look that said, "Yes, I am absolutely in charge of this hallway." It was a time when looking ridiculous was the goal. Hairspray cans were as essential as lunch money. Your hair was a sculpture, a protest, a declaration. And when you walked into school, you prayed it survived the bus ride. Today's sleek and effortless styles have nothing on the crunchy, rigid chaos of 1980s hair. Because back then, beauty was about commitment, and committing meant shellacking your head into a helmet. But when it came to dreaming, nothing held more power than a book so big it made your arms tired to lift it. Speak and Spell. A name so simple, you almost forget just how advanced it felt. This little orange learning machine had a robotic voice that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The keys were rubbery. The screen was a small LED display. And the second it powered on, you felt like a kid genius. This was not just a toy, it was a computer. At least to us it was. And for a lot of people, it was the first time they ever heard a machine talk to them like a teacher would. It would ask you to spell elephant or photograph in that slow, mechanical voice. If you got it wrong, it would buzz like you had just activated some kind of self-destruct sequence. And if you nailed it, that same robotic voice gave you praise like it meant something, like it knew you. Speak and Spell was part game, part lesson, and 100% magic. You did not need Wi-Fi. You did not need batteries half the time. All you needed was the imagination to believe that this talking toy was the smartest machine in the house. And sometimes, it probably was. Of course, intelligence was one thing, but style? That was another story. If you were the kid with this next item, everyone knew you had your life together. There was no sound more powerful in the 1970s than the delicate, distant jingle of the ice cream truck. Except, it was not a jingle the way we hear it today through tinny speakers and digital loops. No, back then, the ice cream man had real brass bells. He would slowly drive down the block, gently ringing them by hand or with a string attached to the window. The sound was soft but unmistakable. It sliced through summer air like a siren of salvation. Kids would freeze mid-game, mid-bite, or a mid-sentence and yell, "Ice cream!" before bolting toward the noise barefoot, clutching whatever spare change they could dig up from a kitchen drawer or the couch cushions. The menu on the side of the truck was like a stained glass window of dreams. Push pops, rocket bombs, orange creamsicles. And if you were lucky enough to have a full dollar, you might even walk away with a cartoon character bar with gumdrop eyes that always looked just a little off. The magic was not just the treat. It was the chase, the chaos, the moment. You did not schedule a visit to the ice cream truck. You hunted it. But if you wanted to feel truly rich as a kid, it did not involve frozen sweets. It happened in the aisles of the grocery store, with something you could not eat, but you definitely collected. In the 1970s, tourist towns across America fell in love with the exotic charm of tuk tuks and rickshaws, those little three-wheeled wonders that looked more at home in Bangkok than on a beachfront boulevard in Florida. But there they were, buzzing around like mosquito-sized taxis, legally driving alongside full-sized cars and trucks. Some were imported directly from Asia. Others were homemade contraptions cobbled together in backyard sheds using scooter engines and whatever metal scraps were lying around. They barely had suspension. Their top speed was a hopeful 25 miles per hour, and turning corners felt like rolling dice. But city officials thought they were charming, tourists loved them, and for a brief moment, they were as American as funnel cake. You could drive one of these with nothing more than a regular driver's license and a little bit of nerve. No airbags, no crumple zones, no real doors, and sometimes no roof either. They were part carnival ride, part cab, and somehow fully legal. Eventually, rising safety concerns and tighter import regulations shut them down on public streets, pushing them into novelty rides at festivals or private events. Still, for a while, you really could get picked up from your hotel in a Tuk Tuk. And if that sounds sketchy, imagine cruising through a rainstorm in a car that did not even come with windshield wipers. There was a time when a trip to McDonald's felt like a miniature holiday. Not because of the burgers or fries, but because of what came with them. Plastic pails shaped like pumpkins, ghosts, or witches that doubled as trick-or-treat buckets and instantly became treasures. Kids carried them around like trophies. They were not just seasonal giveaways. They were Halloween itself. And then there were the Fraggle Rock toys, little plastic Muppets with big hair and tiny accessories jammed into every car cup holder or buried in the back seat like forgotten friends. These toys lived full lives. They went to the park, the grocery store, the doctor's office. Their paint chipped, their arms broke, and still, you refused to throw them away. Fast food tie-ins were not mass-produced landfill bait. They were magic in a cardboard box. And if you were lucky enough to collect the whole set, that was bragging rights for weeks. Now, Happy Meals come with QR codes and lifeless plastic, but back then, they felt alive. And the kids who played with them? They were a walking fashion explosion. Every color, every scent, every can of Aquanet fueling a look that defied gravity and good sense. The UHF dial was like the Wild West of television. You had your regular channels, your ABC, your CBS, your NBC, but then there was the mysterious world of UHF. You had to twist the dial just right, and even then, the screen might be fuzzy, the sound might be off, but if you landed on the right frequency, you struck gold. Strange cartoons, old black and white monster movies, reruns of shows that looked like they were filmed in someone's garage, and the occasional creepy public access broadcast that made you feel like you were watching something you should not be. There were no on-screen guides, no menus. You just turned the knob and hoped for something weird and wonderful. You felt like you discovered something, like you were in on a secret. It was the 1970s version of going down a YouTube rabbit hole, only with antennas and static. And if you were lucky, you might even stumble onto a commercial for one of the most magical possessions a kid could own: a red plastic viewer with reels that could take you anywhere. There was a time when a homemade Dune Buggy could cruise down Main Street without so much as a raised eyebrow. All you needed was an old Volkswagen Beetle chassis, a few hours in the garage, and a wild sense of adventure. These do-it-yourself buggies were chopped, stripped, and rebuilt with bare-bones frames, zero doors, and roll cages that were more decorative than practical. People drove them right onto public highways. No seatbelts, no blinkers, just raw fun and open-air chaos. Some states even allowed them to be registered with little more than a photo and a handshake. And since emissions testing was still in its awkward teenage years, nobody cared if it smelled like you were burning old tires. It all added up to a uniquely rebellious era of backyard brilliance. Of course, modern safety regulators eventually caught on. By the time the 1980s rolled around, you needed a whole lot more than a wrench and a dream to make one of these legal. And if that sounds crazy, wait until you hear how high you could lift your truck without anyone blinking an eye. Dinner used to come in a foil tray, divided like a tiny apartment. Meat in one corner, peas in another, and a brownie that either scorched your mouth or stayed frozen in the middle. TV dinners were not gourmet, but they were futuristic. You would peel back the foil, pop it in the microwave, and wait. That hum meant convenience, progress, and independence. It was not just about saving time. It was about having your own meal, your own space, your own show to eat in front of. Salisbury steak swimming in salty brown sauce, mashed potatoes with a swirl that never mixed right, peas that tasted like metal but looked bright green enough to fool you, and the brownie, always, always the brownie. It was a meal designed by science and nostalgia, all wrapped up in tin. Somewhere along the way, microwaves got faster, portions got smaller, and we traded sections for squeeze pouches. But the memory of that shiny tray, pulled hot from the microwave and placed carefully on a plastic tray table, never really left. Just like the jewelry you wore to dinner that clicked, clacked, and told your whole personality one charm at a time. If any of this made you laugh, cringe, or suddenly crave powdered milk, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more trips down memory lane. We've got plenty more where that came from.